There is a river in America that has swallowed more secrets than any ocean trench, any desert, any mountain range on the continent. It stretches 2,340 miles from a lake in Minnesota you could wade across in summer to the vast, muddy delta where it bleeds into the Gulf of Mexico. The Mississippi drains roughly 41% of the continental United States. Water from 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces funnels into its current. And over the centuries, that current has carried things downstream that no one was ever supposed to find, and hidden things at the bottom that no one has ever been able to retrieve. We are not talking about folklore. We are not talking about ghost stories or river legends passed around a campfire. Every single thing you are about to hear is documented, investigated, and in most cases, still unresolved. Bodies that surface decades after they vanished. A ship full of gold buried under a Kansas farm miles from any water. A mysterious underwater structure that should not exist. A serial killer who used the river itself as a weapon. And a toxic legacy sitting on the riverbed that agencies have quietly been trying to figure out for years. This is the Mississippi, and these are 7 real disturbing stories most people have never heard. The first story starts with a number. Not a date, not a name, a number. Between the years 2000 and 2018, at least 45 college-aged men were found dead in rivers, lakes, and waterways in the upper Midwest. Most of them were young, white, athletic, and last seen leaving a bar or party near a body of water. Many were found in the Mississippi itself, in Minneapolis, La Crosse, Wisconsin, and other cities where the river cuts through the middle of town. Individually, each death was classified as an accidental drowning. A young man has too much to drink, stumbles near the water, falls in. It happens. Toxicology reports often showed elevated blood alcohol levels. Police departments, one after another, signed off on accidental death as the cause. But 2 retired New York City police detectives, Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, started connecting cases and did not like what they found. The pattern was too consistent. The victims were almost always found in water that was not on their logical walking route home. In several cases, the bodies surfaced in locations that would have required the person to walk away from their destination, cross barriers, and enter the water in places that made no practical sense for a stumbling drunk. Gannon and Duarte pointed to something else. Smiley face graffiti found near several of the drowning sites. Spray-painted smiley faces, sometimes with horns or other markings, appeared on walls, bridges, and concrete near locations where the victims entered the water. The detectives theorized that the symbol was a signature, left behind by a killer or group of killers who were staging the drownings. The FBI looked into the claims. In 2008, the Bureau released a statement saying they had reviewed the cases and found no evidence of a serial killer or a connection between the drownings. They characterized the deaths as unrelated, mostly accidental. But the FBI's statement did not end the debate. It only deepened it. Here is why. Several of the cases had details that were genuinely difficult to explain. In La Crosse, Wisconsin, a city of roughly 52,000 people situated on the Mississippi, multiple young men drowned over a span of just a few years, all after nights out drinking, all found in the river. La Crosse became one of the key cities in the pattern. One victim, Luke Homan, disappeared after a night at a bar in 2006. His body was found in the Mississippi 3 days later. He had been an athlete. The water he was found in was not between the bar and his home. His family publicly questioned the accidental drowning ruling. The smiley face killer theory remains officially unproven. No arrests have ever been made in connection with the theory, but Gannon and Duarte continued their investigation for over a decade, cataloging cases, consulting forensic experts, and pushing for further analysis. Some criminologists dismissed the theory outright. Others acknowledged that at least a handful of the cases deserved closer scrutiny than they received. What makes this entry on our list so unsettling is not whether the serial killer theory is correct. It is that dozens of young men ended up dead in the Mississippi and similar waterways, And in case after case, the investigations were closed quickly, often without extensive forensic analysis. The river, in a sense, was the perfect accomplice. A body that enters the Mississippi at night, in cold water, in a strong current. That body can travel miles before surfacing. Evidence is destroyed. Timelines become impossible to pin down. Whether these men were murdered or whether the river simply collected a pattern of tragic accidents, the Mississippi took the answer with them. And the truth is, the river has been doing exactly that for a very long time. If you want to understand just how many secrets the Mississippi holds beneath its surface, consider what happened near Vicksburg, Mississippi in 1862, and what was still sitting on the riverbed more than a century later. During the American Civil War, the Union Navy's campaign to control the Mississippi was one of the most strategically important operations of the entire conflict. Whoever held the river held the continent. The Confederacy knew it, the Union knew it, and in the summer and fall of 1862, both sides threw everything they had into the fight for control of the stretch between Vicksburg and Baton Rouge. On December 12, 1862, the Union ironclad gunboat USS Cairo was steaming up the Yazoo River, a tributary of the Mississippi just north of Vicksburg, clearing Confederate mines, which at the time were called torpedoes. The Cairo was one of the first ironclad warships in American naval history, a city-class gunboat with 13 heavy guns, iron armor plating, and a crew of around 175 men. She was 175 feet long, weighed roughly 512 tons, and was considered one of the most formidable vessels on the river. That afternoon, 2 explosions ripped through the hull in quick succession. Confederate electrically detonated mines, among the first ever used successfully in combat, blew open the bottom of the ship. The Cairo sank in 36 feet of water in approximately 12 minutes. Remarkably, not a single crew member died. They scrambled off the sinking vessel and were rescued by other ships in the flotilla. But the Cairo herself disappeared. The river swallowed her. Mud and silt buried the wreck so completely that within a few years, no one could even pinpoint exactly where she had gone down. She became a ghost. For nearly a century, the ironclad sat beneath the Yazoo riverbed, buried in Mississippi mud, essentially forgotten. Then, in 1956, a historian named Edwin Burse began searching for her. Burse, who would later become the chief historian of the National Park Service, used old maps, Navy reports, and Civil War-era correspondence to narrow down the location. In 1956, he and 2 associates used a compass to detect the magnetic signature of the ironclad's iron hull beneath the mud. They found her. She was buried under roughly 8 feet of silt, invisible from the surface, in almost the exact location the old record suggested. The salvage operation did not begin until 1964, and it was grueling. The wreck had to be pulled from the mud in pieces. When the artifacts came up, they were astonishingly well preserved. The anaerobic environment, no oxygen, sealed in dense river clay, had essentially pickled the contents of the ship. Weapons, personal items, dishes, boots, medicines, naval instruments, and even food stores survived in recognizable condition. The recovered ship and thousands of artifacts are now on display at the Vicksburg National Military Park, making the Cairo the most completely recovered Civil War gunboat in existence. But here's the part that gets under your skin. The Cairo was lost for 102 years. She was sitting right there, beneath a river that people fished on, boated across, and built homes beside, and no one knew. The Mississippi's current and sediment had buried a 512-ton iron warship so thoroughly that it might as well have been on another planet. Now think about everything else that has gone into that river over the past 4 centuries. Ships, cargo, vehicles, people. And ask yourself how much of it is still down there, sealed in mud, waiting. What do you think lies beneath the stretches of the Mississippi that no one has ever surveyed with modern equipment? What else is buried in that silt? Drop your answer in the comments because, honestly, the known discoveries might only be the beginning. The next story is not at the bottom of the Mississippi. It is 400 miles from the river's nearest bank, buried under a Kansas cornfield. And that is exactly what makes it so strange. In September 1856, the steamboat Arabia was heading upstream on the Missouri River, the Mississippi's largest tributary, loaded with 200 tons of cargo bound for frontier towns and general stores in the Western Territories. She was carrying everything settlers needed: clothing, tools, dishes, boots, bottles of preserves, guns, building supplies, and barrels of whiskey. On September 5th, the Arabia struck a submerged walnut tree trunk, a snag in river terminology, and sank rapidly near the town of Parkville, Missouri, just north of Kansas City. One mule drowned. All 130 passengers survived. The river buried the Arabia quickly. Within days, she was beneath the waterline. Within years, the Missouri River shifted its channel, as it often does, and the wreck ended up not underwater at all, but under dry land. The river simply moved away from the wreck site, and decades of sediment and topsoil piled on top. By the 20th century, the Arabia was sitting 45 feet beneath a Kansas farm field, half a mile from the nearest water. In 1988, a man named David Hawley and a small team of treasure hunters used old maps, newspaper reports from 1856, and a magnetometer to locate the wreck beneath the cornfield. They got permission from the landowner and began digging. What they pulled out of the ground was staggering. The cargo was almost perfectly preserved. Sealed in river mud with no oxygen exposure for 132 years, the goods looked almost new. They recovered entire crates of fine china with the packing straw still intact, boots that were still flexible, buttons, beads, and bolts of fabric with the colors still vivid, jars of pickles and preserves that were, reportedly, still edible, though no one was brave enough to try them beyond a taste test. The collection ultimately included more than 200 tons of pre-Civil War artifacts, making it one of the largest single collections of its kind in the United States. The Hawley family opened the Steamboat Arabia Museum in Kansas City's historic River Market neighborhood, where the collection is displayed today. It is essentially a time capsule of American frontier life in the 1850s, not reconstructed or replicated, but the actual objects, pulled from the earth, cleaned, and preserved. But the Arabia is not alone. Historians estimate that approximately 400 steamboats sank in the Missouri River alone during the 19th century. Many of them, like the Arabia, are now buried under farmland, parking lots, and small towns, because the Missouri River changed course so many times that its old channels are scattered across the floodplain like the shed skin of a snake. Some of those wrecks have never been found. Others have been located by magnetometer but never excavated because the cost and logistical complexity of digging 40 or 50 feet through waterlogged earth is enormous. The Arabia story is a window into what the Mississippi River system does. It does not just carry things, it buries them. It moves sideways. It covers its tracks. And somewhere beneath the farms and towns and quiet stretches of floodplain in a dozen states, there are ships full of cargo, history, and, almost certainly, human remains, sealed in mud, waiting for someone with a magnetometer and a lot of patience. Now we go back to the Mississippi itself, and deeper, to something sitting on the bottom that is not a ship and is not cargo. It is something far more troubling. In the mid-20th century, the Dow chemical plant in Plaquemine, Louisiana, and other industrial facilities lining the lower Mississippi between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, a stretch of river sometimes called Cancer Alley, discharged chemicals into the river for decades. Among those chemicals were dioxins, heavy metals, chlorinated compounds, and a long list of industrial byproducts that settled into the riverbed sediment. But the specific case that has disturbed environmental researchers the most involves the stretch of the Mississippi near Natchez, Mississippi, and further south. Studies conducted by the United States Geological Survey and the Environmental Protection Agency over the past several decades have found that the sediment of the lower Mississippi contains layers of contamination that read like a geological record of American industrialization. Core samples pulled from the riverbed revealed distinct layers of lead, mercury, polychlorinated biphenyls, commonly known as PCBs, pesticides, and other persistent organic pollutants. The concentrations are not abstract. A 2007 study published in the journal Environmental Science and Technology found that sediment samples from certain stretches of the lower Mississippi contained PCB levels that exceeded safety thresholds for aquatic life. PCBs are particularly nasty. They do not break down quickly in the environment. They bioaccumulate, meaning they build up in the fat tissues of fish and other organisms, and they move up the food chain. A catfish living in contaminated sediment absorbs the chemicals. A larger fish eats the catfish. A human eats the larger fish. The states of Louisiana and Mississippi have had fish consumption advisories posted along sections of the river for years. But here's the part that makes this more than an environmental footnote. The Mississippi River is the drinking water source for approximately 20 million people. Cities like New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Memphis, and St. Louis all draw their municipal water supply from the river. The water is treated, filtered, and processed before it reaches taps, but the sediment at the bottom of the river is a different matter. When the river floods, when currents shift, when dredging operations churn up the bottom, those buried contaminants can be resuspended into the water column. In a 2019 report, the United States Geological Survey noted that legacy contaminants in the Mississippi River Basin continue to pose risks, particularly in areas where sediment has been undisturbed for decades and could be mobilized during major flood events. The 2011 Mississippi River floods, among the largest in recorded history, caused exactly this kind of sediment disturbance across hundreds of miles of the lower river. What is sitting on the bottom of the Mississippi is, in effect, a chemical time capsule. Every decade of American industrial output left a layer. Some of those layers are now buried under newer, cleaner sediment, but they have not gone anywhere. They are just waiting for the next flood, the next dredge, the next shift in the current to bring them back to the surface. If this is the kind of story that pulls you in, not because it is comfortable, but because it matters, subscribe to the channel, because the more you look at what the Mississippi carries and conceals, the more you realize that the official version of "everything is fine" starts to feel a little thin. The fifth story involves a man, a river, and a killing method so deliberate that investigators spent years trying to understand the full scope of what happened. Between 1991 and 1997, a serial killer was operating along the Mississippi River corridor. His name was Robert Leroy Anderson, and while his confirmed victim count was relatively small compared to more infamous serial killers, the details of his crimes and his connection to the river made the case one of the most disturbing in the region's modern history. Anderson lived in and around the area of Lake Andes and the Missouri River Basin in South Dakota, part of the broader Mississippi River drainage system. In 1994, he abducted a 29-year-old woman named Larissa Demansky from a rural highway. Demansky, originally from Kazakhstan, was relatively new to the area. Anderson kidnapped her, held her, assaulted her, and murdered her. He then dismembered her body and disposed of the remains in multiple locations across the rural landscape. Some of her remains were never recovered. In 1996, Anderson abducted another woman, Piper Striley, a 28-year-old from Lake Andes. Strile's disappearance triggered a larger investigation, and forensic evidence eventually tied Anderson to both crimes. He was arrested, tried, and convicted. During the investigation, it became clear that Anderson had used the vast, sparsely populated landscape along the river system as a disposal network. The distances between where victims were taken and where remains were found, when they were found at all, spanned dozens of miles. The river basin's geography, with its ravines, tributaries, floodplains, and isolated stretches, gave him cover that an urban killer would never have had. Anderson was sentenced to death. He was executed by lethal injection in 2003, making him the first person executed in South Dakota in 56 years. But what lingers about the Anderson case is not the conviction. It is the unanswered question of scope. Investigators suspected that Anderson may have been responsible for additional disappearances in the region, cases that were never closed, women who vanished near the river corridor and were never found. The rural geography of the upper Mississippi and Missouri basins is staggering. Hundreds of miles of river, flanked by bluffs, forests, farmland, and stretches of country where a person could disappear and not be missed for days. The Mississippi River corridor has produced a disproportionate number of serial killers and unsolved disappearances over the past century. Criminologists have noted this pattern without fully explaining it. Part of the answer is simple geography. The river connects major population centers, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Memphis, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, with long, isolated stretches of rural land in between. A person moving along that corridor has access to both victims and disposal sites. The current carries evidence downstream. The mud buries what does not float, and the sheer length of the river, crossing 10 state jurisdictions, means that investigations are fragmented, with different police departments, different coroners, different databases, and different priorities. The Mississippi is not just a river. For a certain kind of predator, it is infrastructure. The sixth story takes us beneath the surface in a different way, not into the mud, but into the water itself, near a structure that should not be there. In 2013, a team conducting side-scan sonar surveys along a stretch of the Mississippi River near Memphis, Tennessee, mapped something unusual on the riverbed. The sonar images showed what appeared to be a series of large, roughly rectangular stone formations sitting on the bottom, partially buried in silt. The structures did not match any known shipwreck, any bridge foundation, any modern dumping or construction project. They were too regular to be natural rock formations and too large to be dismissed as debris. The initial discovery drew interest from a small circle of researchers and amateur historians, but no large-scale archaeological investigation was launched. The Mississippi's current in that stretch is powerful, moving at roughly 3 to 4 miles per hour under normal conditions and significantly faster during high water, making any kind of dive operation expensive, dangerous, and logistically complex. Visibility at depth in the Mississippi is essentially zero. The water is so laden with suspended sediment that divers operate entirely by touch. Underwater cameras are nearly useless. There have been similar sonar anomalies recorded in other stretches of the river. In some cases, follow-up investigations have revealed mundane explanations: old barge hulls, collapsed dock pilings, discarded concrete from bridge projects. But in other cases, the anomalies have never been conclusively identified. The cost of mounting a proper underwater archaeological expedition in the Mississippi, with specialized equipment, safety protocols for zero visibility diving in strong current, and the expertise to identify what is being examined, runs into hundreds of thousands of dollars. For objects that might turn out to be dumped construction rubble, the funding rarely materializes. What keeps this story alive among river researchers and historians is a broader question. The Mississippi River Valley was home to some of the most sophisticated pre-Columbian civilizations in North America. The Cahokia complex, near modern-day St. Louis, was a city of perhaps 20,000 people at its peak around 1100 of the Common Era, larger than London at the same time. The Mississippian culture built massive earthen mounds, maintained complex trade networks spanning thousands of miles, and engineered landscape modifications that are still visible from the air today. And yet, almost nothing is known about what the Mississippian peoples may have built along the river's actual banks and in its floodplain, because the river has eroded, buried, or washed away virtually all of it. Every time the Mississippi floods and shifts course, which it has done repeatedly over the centuries, it destroys or buries whatever was in its path. Archaeologists working in the Mississippi Valley have noted that an unknown number of sites have been lost to the river entirely. Not damaged, not partially preserved, gone. The sonar anomalies near Memphis may be nothing. They may be 20th century debris, but they may also be the remains of something much older, something that the river covered up and the current kept hidden. And until someone puts the money and the divers into the water, no one will know. That uncertainty is what makes the Mississippi such a strange body of water. It is not that we know it holds secrets. It is that we know we do not have the tools, the funding, or, in many cases, the will to go looking for them. The final story is the most recent, and in some ways, the most quietly disturbing. In August 2021, Hurricane Ida made landfall in Louisiana as a Category 4 storm. The storm surge pushed the Gulf of Mexico inland, and the flooding that followed reshaped stretches of the lower Mississippi Delta. When the water receded, something emerged from the mud along the banks and in the shallow waters of Bayou Lafourche, a distributary of the Mississippi southeast of Baton Rouge. Bones, ship timbers, iron fittings, and shackles. What the storm uncovered were the remains of vessels linked to the domestic slave trade. Between the 1810s and the 1860s, the Mississippi River was the central artery of the American slave trade's internal transport network. After the importation of enslaved people from Africa was banned by federal law in 1808, the domestic trade, moving enslaved people from the Upper South to the cotton and sugar plantations of the lower Mississippi Valley, became one of the most profitable industries in the country. Tens of thousands of enslaved people were transported by river, packed onto steamboats and flatboats heading south to Natchez and New Orleans, two of the largest slave markets in the Western Hemisphere. Some of those boats sank, some were scuttled, some were simply abandoned when they were no longer seaworthy, and the river buried them, just as it buries everything. In the aftermath of Ida, local researchers and community members reported finding artifacts consistent with early to mid-19th century river vessels in areas where the storm had scoured away layers of sediment. The Louisiana Division of Archaeology was notified. Similar discoveries, exposed timbers, iron hardware, and, in some cases, human remains, had occurred after previous major storms, including Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in 2005. But the discoveries are often temporary. The river redeposits sediment quickly. What the storm uncovers, the next high water event buries again, sometimes within weeks. Forensic analysis of remains found in the Mississippi Delta region over the past 2 decades has, in several cases, revealed injuries consistent with enslavement, healed fractures, signs of malnutrition, dental evidence of dietary deprivation. In at least one documented case, iron shackle fragments were found in direct association with skeletal remains. The identities of these individuals are, in almost every case, unknown and unknowable. They were not recorded by name. They were listed as property in ledgers that were themselves lost, burned, or discarded. The Mississippi River does not just hold the industrial history of America. It holds the human cost of that history, in the most literal sense. The bones of enslaved people are in that riverbed. The ships that carried them are in that mud. And every major storm rearranges the sediment just enough to remind us that the river has not forgotten, even if the country has tried to. What would you do if you found something like that on a riverbank after a storm? A rusted shackle, a fragment of bone, a piece of timber from a vessel that carried human beings as cargo. Share this video with someone who should hear these stories, because the Mississippi does not give up its history easily, and the people who were lost in it deserve to be remembered. There is a reason the Mississippi unsettles people in a way that the ocean does not. The ocean is vast and alien. We expect it to hold secrets. We expect it to be indifferent. But the Mississippi runs through the middle of the country, through cities and towns and farmland, past backyards and boat ramps and children's fishing spots. It is familiar. It is domestic. And that is exactly what makes it so disturbing. Because the things it has swallowed are not ancient sea monsters or sunken galleons from distant centuries. They are us. Our ships, our chemicals, our crimes, our history, our dead. The river does not curate what it takes. It does not distinguish between a Union gunboat and a bottle of industrial solvent, between a steamboat full of frontier supplies and a body that entered the water on a cold night in Wisconsin. It takes everything, buries it in silt, and moves on. And it has been doing this for longer than any city on its banks has existed. 2,340 miles of moving water, draining the heart of a continent. And somewhere under that brown, opaque surface, right now as you listen to this, there are things no one has found yet. Ships, bones, artifacts, evidence. Answers to questions that no one has thought to ask. The Mississippi does not give up its secrets. You have to dig them out. And most of the time, no one does.